I respected and loved my teachers. And I think if you like your teachers and you see the good in them, they're going to work with you more. They're going to teach you more. There's got to be a good relation between teacher and student. Talk to them more. Ask them more questions after class. Let them know you appreciate them. You know, if you like someone, you're so much more likely to give more of yourself. You can't, and you've got to show interest. Very often have residents all the time come through our practice. One resident appears with his notebook and his pencil, and every word you say, he writes it down, and he asks questions or she asks questions, and you find yourself talking more and more to them. You know, so I'll stop and I'll say, now, if a patient hears a soft whisper, they have less than a 15 decibel loss. A medium whisper is about 30. Medium loud is 40. A loud is 60. And use your tuning for. I find myself, if they show interest, that I'm much more anxious to teach them. There are others who'll kind of come in and look at their watch, or you know, their phones are on and they're clicking those and so forth, and they just have no expression on their face. They don't ask questions. They don't ask questions. That's a big thing. So I treat them entirely differently. I'm human. Those who show no interest spend a week or two and leave. Those who show interest go out of there having learned a heck of a lot. And I find that we have to rate them at the end of 2 weeks that they're with us, and Tony and Lenny and I all rate them the same. And because they're kids who ask questions, who show you that they're eager to learn, versus the one who sits there and does nothing. So my advice to kids would be, ask questions of your teachers, show an interest, smile, you know, work at it. Make a friend of your teacher, and you'll like your teacher and they will like you. To you, my children and grandchildren, perhaps I say that what Uncle Harry said in the movie that I hope you see many times that he made with Bubby, where they asked him, and Harry was 91 years old at the time, what's the most important thing about life? And he said, the most important thing about life is your family. He said, when it's all said and done, whatever you have done or not done in life, the most important thing is your family. That's where you spend your childhood, your adulthood, and at the end of your life, that's the most important part too. So I think it's important for all of us to stay together, to spend as much time as we can together. And there's another thing that I thought of as we were talking this morning. You guys know, all of my grandchildren know, that I never end a conversation on the telephone without saying I love you. And I think that's something that came from my parents, and that's something that Sandra and I always do, and that's something I always do with you. And you know, now that I'm in my 80s, with a lot of my good friends, I end the conversation saying, I love you. And they say, Bill, I love you too. So perhaps that's the most important message that I can give all of you. So it's interesting how many serendipitous things happen to me. Going to medical school, deciding to go to medical school my last year. Going from medical school to Brooklyn. Being able to give myself a physical, get into the Air Force. Going into OBGYN, having a great hospital commander who encouraged me to become a flight surgeon. Becoming a flight surgeon where my problems were ear, nose, and throat problems. for that reason, taking a residency in ear, nose, and throat with a guy who turned out to be one of the greatest and most respected chief, wrote many textbooks that I could ever find. Having him being a good friend of John Shea, going to John Shea as his first resident, and then within a year or two after starting my practice, did only stapedectomies, and ending up, at the end of my career, outside of John Shea, doing the most stapedectomies of anybody in the world, and yet being able to live in that small town that we talked about, where I used to walk to work, as opposed to the guys in the big cities who did quite a bit, where they were working in 3 or 4 hospitals, and all the politics involved and the time involved in driving back and forth to work. So didn't I have a wonderful, fantastic life? And I certainly didn't deserve it. I always felt I was very lucky. I always felt that I made good choices. But a lot of what happened to me was luck. So on one hand. On the other hand, my dad had a saying, good luck comes to those who work hard. When I say working hard, I just don't mean working at night in your room or in the library. I mean working hard at your relationships. I talked about liking my teachers and making sure they liked me. I talked about establishing friends, good friends, making people feel good about themselves. Always trying to be a good friend, to do the right thing for them. And that's lasted all my life. I get 3 or 4 calls a week from someone who a friend of mine said to call me because their sister-in-law living in Minnesota has a child who has an ear problem. And I call that patient. I've just done that all my life, where I try to be good to people and have good relationships. And I think that makes your life so much better, so much better. In 1963, I'd started practice in 60. My dad said, well, it's time now to get into a nice office. And I said, yeah, I think so. And he said, we might as well do the house at the same time. You're going to need a house, because we were living in a tiny little house that I had negotiated. So my dad said to me, now, I'd let you go all these years by yourself, but I'm going to tell you now, when you go to a bank, they're obligated to you. You're their customer. They've got to be good to you. Don't feel like, they're doing you a favor. You're doing them a favor by walking into that bank. The experience, the use of the computer, the teaching, the development of instruments allowed me then to go on and through my computer prove that the theory on pregnancy and otosclerosis was wrong. Through my computer have the faith that I could operate on a combat pilot, and through my experience and everything again being data proven, I came up with I really was able to prove the things about the long prosthesis syndrome. John Payablis has been a very important friend to me also. I get to see him a lot. Tennis has been what brought us together. I hope I can go on playing tennis with my shoulder, because it sure is a factor in our friendship. But he may be the wisest man I know. And the thing I learned from John is I guess he's sort of a male grandma, a male bubby, in that anyone to whom he introduces you, he introduces as the greatest person in this or the greatest person in that. And when you go through his factory, he says, I want you to meet Joe. Now, Joe is in charge of our freezers. Do you realize if one freezer would go bad, we could go out of business. I mean, it would ruin our company. And this is Alice. She's in charge of the mayonnaise. Now, do you realize if she puts on too much mayonnaise and has her people put on too much mayonnaise on the production line, the sandwich is ruined. How many sandwiches could we ruin? She didn't put up enough, the customers wouldn't like the sandwich. Do you realize how important she is, Dr. Lippy? So when you go through his plant, everyone to whom you're introduced is the greatest. And I think that is such an important thing, and that's why I try to do that. I try to do that with people and compliment them, especially in front of other people, or talk about how good they are. Because I mean it in most cases. I really do. And it's just a great way to treat people, and I try very hard to do that. Heroes are people whom I really admired. Probably the first one was Bill Saunders, who was my professor of otolaryngology when I was a resident. He was just so straight, factual, honest, wise, intelligent. He's a great hero of mine. Probably the next one is Ron Steele, my Australian friend who came to Israel as the Davis Cup coach of Israel and stayed. He's still there. He's the same every day. In coaching players, he says he never gets too excited at a win and too depressed in a loss. He runs a straight line. He doesn't try to change a serve in a day or in a session. He says it takes 6 months. He looks at everything. Over the next 6 months, we're going to do this. Over the next 6 months, we're going to do that. And I think it's really an Australian trait, and I try very often to emulate that, to not expect a sudden change of any sort. And probably the two men who've accomplished the most that I know are my heroes are Rolly Moskowitz, we talked about him before, and Menachem Shmuel, to be admired and to be considered by his peers as probably the best test pilot in the world. I admire all of them.